This is your Thursday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. We're going to have a lot of fun today. A little different show for you on Daily Delivery today. Not going to do an interview today. Instead, I'm going to take a bunch of your questions, kind of an all mailbag version of Daily Delivery. Got a bunch of good ones from you guys on Twitter, so I appreciate that. Not even going to do a what did I miss? Just shaking it up totally. You know, I like my formats. You know, I like my standard kind of way we do this here. But we're going to just do an entire show of questions from you guys and answers from me. We'll get into some of the stuff that's happened recently in the context of that. But let's get started, should we? Why not? First question, which is probably the one I'm going to spend the bulk of my time on, comes from Dan Wade. Wants to know which Minnesota coach's seat is the hottest right now. And by way of his guessing, he kind of clarified that he considers 6 coaches in that mix. I think he's considering the pro coaches of the major sports here in this market for that question. So, so for just taking those 6, let's get to it with those 6, and I'm going to rank them in terms of least hot to hottest. And I should probably mention at the outset my criteria for this. Basically, it's not so much who's everybody mad about or what's the temperature necessarily. It's if I look at this objectively, who could I see potentially being the first of these coaches to lose their job? That to me defines the hottest hot seat. Who among these coaches might lose their job the first? It doesn't give me pleasure to talk about coaches potentially losing their jobs, losing their livelihood. But, this is a business. This is a high stakes in a lot of cases here. So, questions about this are fair game and really are, probably a better way just to assess where all of these franchises and teams are at the moment. So, with that said, with that, kind of ranking system in place, let's go 6 through 1, the least hot seat to the hottest hot seat. Number 6, Cheryl Reeve, Lynx. Yeah, I don't think her seat is very hot. Do you guys think so? I know she's been here for a long time, which sometimes can work against a coach. You want to find a fresh voice, but I don't think you're going to look for a fresh voice off of someone who's won 4 WNBA championships and who kind of seamlessly rebuilt the Lynx after that kind of championship era, after that window kind of closed. It never closed all the way. It just it stayed open, like it stayed half open. They kept making the playoffs. They got all the way to the semifinals of the league in the bubble last season, and they're looking quite good again this season, overcoming an 0-4 start. They're now 10-7 after a win against Dallas on Wednesday night. So 0-4 start, 10-7 right now into the Olympic break. That tells me that they're 10-3 in their last 13 games. Yeah, that's championship caliber play once again for the Lynx. Kayla McBride looks like she's an excellent signing. Had another big game against Dallas. That was a Reeve move, since she added the GM title to her duties a couple years back. She's made a lot of good draft picks, had back-to-back Rookies of the Year with Nafisa Collier and Crystal Dangerfield, pushing a lot of the right buttons in free agency and with their personnel moves, pushing a lot of the right buttons with, figuring out how to adapt to different styles on the court while still, mixing a little bit of the old roster. Still have Sylvia Fowles, who's been great in a lot of cases this season, with some of these new players. So if you're talking about a coach who I think is absolutely safe, at least for the short to near to medium term, it absolutely is Cheryl Reeve. I cannot imagine something that would happen, this season, next season, that would cause her to lose her job as head coach. So right there, that is the least hot of the hot seats. Number 5, Chris Finch, Timberwolves. This is less about what he has accomplished and more about a couple of key facts that tend to work in a coach's favor. Number 1, he's brand new. He came in the middle of last year, but he wasn't an interim coach. He came in the middle of last year. He's been mentioned, this is the second piece of it, he's been mentioned for quite some time as a guy that Gerson Rosas, the Timberwolves president, wants to hire, that he sees as his long-term fit to kind of execute this vision for how he wants to play. So those two things, you look at it and you say that the Timberwolves are kind of in this for the long haul, I think they have aspirations of being, better next season, but I don't think they have, aspirations of, hey, we're going to suddenly become a championship team next season. So that also buys a coach a little bit of time. If you understand where you are in your timeline, understand kind of, that this team probably isn't in a hurry to win right now, can grow along with a coach. And, let's face it, he had a certain amount of success relative to his predecessors last year as well. They were 7-24 when Ryan Saunders was fired. Chris Finch goes 16-20 in the second half of that season, has a good finish, shows what he can do once he gets a Karl Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell healthy together. So I'd say Chris Finch definitely not on the hot seat. That can change. Coaches can become short term. It's a fragile sport. You saw Anthony Edwards, had an apparent ankle injury the other day. If they sustain any sorts of injuries this season, the year could go downhill in a hurry. But for right now, I see Chris Finch as very, very safe in his job. Okay, number 4 on this list, Dean Evison, Wild head coach. And again, I don't think this means that, because I've put 2 people ahead of him, it doesn't mean I think his seat is even remotely warm right now. I mean, he was one of the 3 finalists for the Jack Adams Award, which goes to the Coach of the Year. Didn't win it, but he did get into that mix. Wild had a resurgent season last year. I thought Evison made a lot of good coaching decisions, had a lot of good imprints on this team, the way they played stylistically, the messaging that was sent to the veterans, that there's going to be accountability. I think he did a really good job this year as their head coach. The only reason I put him, lower on this list, I guess, or at number 4, maybe hotter, quote unquote, than Chris Finch, is that he did come in as an interim coach. And sometimes when a coach is hired as an interim, they become a little bit more expendable as time goes on. But I think Dean Evison's debut with the Wild this year certainly was encouraging and should give us hope for what he can show going forward in the future. I think there's going to be some key questions he's going to have to grow with this team. The expectations next season are going to be much higher than they were this year going into the season. I think nobody's going to be surprised by what Kirill Kaprizov does this year, things like that. But if you're just talking about a good debut, Dean Evison certainly did that this year. So I'm not saying his seat is warm in any way necessarily. I'm just saying I'd put Reeve and Finch ahead of him for certain kind of extraneous reasons. Now we get into some interesting territory. The 3 at the 3-2-1 here could go in different orders depending on how you see it. Other people might see this differently, but here is how I have it stacked up. Number 3 on the Minnesota coaches hot seat rankings right now, Rocco Baldelli, Twins manager. Some of you might have him at number 1. I think Dan Wade had him at number 1 in his guessing when he submitted his questions, and other people might think the same. Here's why I don't think Rocco Baldelli is number 1 on this list. 1, this is his first bad year out of 3. Comes in 2019. He's manager of the year. The Twins win 101 games, go to the playoffs. They flame out in the playoffs. That's disappointing, but still. Manager of the year in 2019. 2020, manages through the pandemic. They win another AL Central championship. They win 60% of their games. They're on pace for, another 97, 98 win season in a normal year. Navigating that was not easy, especially with the hitting not going the way they wanted it to, but they managed to get through that season, 36-24, win back-to-back AL Central championships. And I know, some of what happened in that 60-game season we might be tempted to throw out. Statistically, I think the pitching, maybe caught a little break with the opposition they were facing, things like that. But, bottom line, they can only play who they play. They won another AL Central title, and that was largely due to Rocco Baldelli's calming influence. Now, come to this season, it's a little bit different, right? They are 35-50 after losing, 5 out of 6 to Chicago over the last 10 days or so. They were certainly going nowhere this year. It's been a disaster this year any way you slice it, and I think some of Rocco Baldelli's lack of urgency, some of that served him well in these last 2 seasons before this, especially when 2019 Twins started to fade in July. They didn't panic. They came back. They rallied. They finished strong. 2020, that season could have gone all sorts of different ways, but when you have a steadying manager who's not going to get too high or too low, you can get through a year like that. This year, I feel like they haven't had urgency from the beginning, and I think that's worked against them, and I think that's been some of his influence. I also think you can certainly question some of his usage of the bullpen and some of how his in-game strategy has worked or largely hasn't worked. But I think you got some things that have worked against him there as well. I certainly think he needs a new bench coach, and that's, I don't say that to be callous, because the reason he doesn't have a bench coach right now is tragedy. Mike Bell dying shortly before the season started, but that certainly has had an impact and maybe has exposed some of the deficiencies and some of the holes in Rocco Baldelli's managerial repertoire. So I think if you get into 2022, you've got a much better plan going forward. You get him the support around him he needs. He could have a bounce back, quote unquote, managerial year. I'd have a hard time imagining he's going to get fired this year, even if it goes even worse the rest of the way, because of the success he already had. He's built up a decent amount of equity. Yeah, I know Paul Molitor got fired the year after he won Manager of the Year 2017, won Manager of the Year 2018. He was gone at the end of that season. He hadn't built up the same amount of equity as Rocco Baldelli. Paul Molitor had a couple of bad seasons, a couple of okay seasons. I don't think his talent was as good as Rocco's had. But I think Rocco Baldelli has built up enough equity to survive a year like this. So if we're talking about a guy, if the rankings go according to, in my head, if they go according to who is most likely to get fired, sooner rather than later, I think his seat could get hot with a bad year next year. But I think there's people, higher, lower, however you want to look at it on this list, who are in more immediate danger than he is of getting fired. Okay, that brings me to number 2 on this list, Adrian Heath, manager of Minnesota United Soccer. Heath's been here since 2017, since the jump, since Minnesota United made it to Major League Soccer. So this is his 5th season in the fold. First 2 years were rough, but that was probably part of the plan. 2019 got better. They made the playoffs, lost right away, went to the MLS bubble down in Florida last year, made it to the Final Four of that tournament, almost made it to the Cup Finals, had a 2-0 lead that they couldn't quite hold on to. So you think that builds up a certain amount of equity, and I think it does, but that said, he's got a certain amount of control over the types of players he wants on this roster. And this year hasn't been going great. They had a slow start. They'd gotten better, but they lost again Wednesday, kind of ended a string of, decent to good results. But, they're kind of on the fringes of the playoff race right now. They would make it, I think, as the lowest, number 7 seed in the West if the playoffs started today. I think there's something to prove with the rest of this year for Adrian Heath. I'm not saying he's in imminent danger. He's not, I think the Heath out hashtag on Twitter that fans like to use, I don't think that's that's going to happen tomorrow, but you don't have to squint too hard to see, some questions at the end of this season if things don't get, at least reasonably more consistent this season. Now, if their play over the last 5 or 6 weeks is more indicative of how the rest of the year is going to go, then I could see him being pretty safe, making the playoffs, maybe getting another playoff win, something like that. I think that would keep him safe. But if this thing goes the other direction this year, after all the investment they've made in the roster, bringing in, more talented players, bringing in a veteran club that he can work with, I could see that, being a question at the end of this season, but not the hottest seat here in Minnesota sports, not in terms of the pro coaches at least. The big reveal then is pretty easy, right? There's only one coach left out of the big 6 major pro sports teams in this market. So I'm going to say Mike Zimmer is the hottest of the hot seats for the Vikings. Now, what works in his favor is I think ownership likes him. The Wilf family likes Mike Zimmer. They like the credibility he has brought to this organization. They like, being consistently in the mix, at least at the start of the year. That said, those loyalties can fray, and I think, if the criteria I laid out at the start is, who essentially is one poor season away from me thinking they're in the most danger of losing their job, I think that's Mike Zimmer. This is year 8 for him, which in some cases works in a coach's favor. Longevity, I think, is working in Cheryl Reeves' favor right now and puts her at the least hot seat part of this conversation that we talked about earlier, because she's got all that equity built up from those 4 championships last decade, and she's rebuilt this team to a point now where you could see it happening again. Mike Zimmer's been up, down, up, down, up, down. They've made the playoffs in the odd years. They've missed the playoffs in the even years. So And I guess what I would also say is the highs haven't been as high as you might like them. 2 playoff wins in 7 years. One of them required a miracle. One of them took overtime, both against the Saints. That's good. You start every year and you think this team could be competitive. At the start of every season, you can make the case that the Vikings could make the playoffs, and various things have gone wrong. The Teddy Bridgewater injury, maybe being at the top of that list, and just how that impacted the course of this franchise and how their quarterback and how their cap situation has played out. But the ups, like I said, have not been as high as I might like them to be. And if they don't make the playoffs this season, that'd be 3 out of 4 years where they'd miss the playoffs. And that, to me, would signal, okay, you're starting to this act is starting to wear thin. The defense starting to get kind of old. Is this message really resonating still with the players? And at that point, it would not surprise me at all to see a regime change, even as much as I think the Wilf family likes Mike Zimmer, likes Rick Spielman. Something like a 7-10 season this year. Remember, they're 17 games now. Kind of a repeat of last year where, again, last year they kept the bottom from completely falling out after being 1-5, but that was not where they thought they were going to be when the season started. If they have another year like that, I could certainly see a change at the top, and I could see Mike Zimmer's seat getting really hot with just even a marginally slow start to this 2021 season. Dan Wade, I hope that answered your question. Geez, I took like half the show to answer it, but it was a good way to assess where each of these teams is. Also, to think about the coaches and how things are going. So appreciate that question. Let's hop into a few more as we continue on with this all mailbag edition of Daily Delivery. Mark Jensen has 2 questions. Number 1, will the Gophers men's basketball team add another big man besides Eric Curry? I think they've got to. I love the story of Curry basically coming out of grad assistantship to throw another body into that mix, some experience, a veteran. But I got to think, when Marcus Fuller was on the podcast, a week or 2 ago, he said they were going to keep pursuing. Now they lost out on Sterling Manley from North Carolina, who they were hoping could come in and make immediate impact. We just reported that he's going pro instead of coming here, so that's that to strike against this plan. But I still think they're gonna find somebody, whether it's in the portal, whether it's a transfer from a junior college or something like that. I got to imagine they're going to add more depth there. So I think they've made that a priority. I know that once you get to July, as we're in right now, you're not exactly picking from the widest field, but I got to imagine they're at least going to add one more big man to that mix. Other question from Mark Jensen. Any thoughts on who else the Twins can bring up from the minors this year? I'm going to give you 2 names there that I like. Now, again, they've called up a lot of their prospects already, and we're seeing Trevor Larnach, Alex Kirilloff maybe having bigger roles this year. Maybe not Kirilloff. We kind of thought of a decent sized role for him this year. Larnach, though, we didn't necessarily think he was going to have this big of an impact. Both those guys becoming basically everyday players as this season has progressed the way it has, due to injuries, due to them playing pretty well, and due to, let's get a look at these guys and see what they've got, heading into 2022. So a lot of, even Nick Gordon up, some of their other pitchers, seeing Bailey Ober already. You've seen a lot of, their blue chip, ready to go guys already. But I would say 2 guys to keep an eye on even as we go forward here. Pitcher Josh Winder. He just got a promotion to St. Paul AAA's, between AA and AAA so far this season, 4-0 with a 2.17 ERA. Those are all starts, 62 innings, 75 strikeouts, allowing fewer than 1 walk and hit per inning pitched. That's a pretty good stat line. You probably would like to get a look at him, assuming the innings aren't mounting for him, based, a lot of these guys, that missed the 2020 season, they're being extra cautious with them. But I have to imagine that if he keeps pitching the way he does, the Twins might want to get a look at him at some point, especially if they get to the deadline here and they make a move and, deal away some pitching. There's going to be some rotation slots opening up for some of these guys to jump into from the minors. And I think Josh Winder has become, next in line as he's become, healthy and effective this season. The other one is a guy I had, did a story on a week or 2 ago, had quoted him on this podcast, Jose Miranda from the Saints, hitting prospect, Had 3 home runs in his Saints debut, has done fine since then. He's just 23, so he's still pretty young, still kind of figuring it out. But, again, kind of a corner infielder, third base, second base, can play some of that too. The more versatility he's going to have in the field, the better, because I think he's going to be a pretty good hitter. Toby Gardenhire, the Saints manager, said, I've known him since he was 18. He can hit. He's been able to hit ever since then. His pitch selection getting a lot better, and that's what you want to see when a guy's going to maybe make a jump all the way up here. So those are the 2 guys I could see, maybe not getting immediate call-ups, but that could be factors more than just, a cursory look that they might want to get a longer look at as the year goes along. Next question, Tom wants to know, what is an appropriate punishment for the Minnesota Wild organization if they are able to extend hashtag KK Calder this summer? That obviously means Kirill Kaprizov, as he starts the 2021-2022 season with Victor Rask as his center. So I think the question isn't so much should they get punished for extending him. They better extend him, and I think they will. The question is how much should we give them grief if they aren't able to upgrade his playmaking center next to him, and I think that's got to be a priority. I think we gave the Wild a little bit of a free pass this last year on their center depth. I think they knew their centers weren't great. I think they got, I don't say lucky, but the emergence of Joel Eriksson Ek was a good story for them and absolutely necessary. Gave them that piece at center, but I don't think he's the perfect center to play with Kaprizov going forward. I think you split those guys up like they did this past season. I love that line with Foligno and Ek and Greenway, more of a rugged line, kind of battle in the corners, control possession, get chances that way. That's not really it's not necessarily the center that Kaprizov should be with. He can play with a lot of different guys, but he needs someone with a certain amount of talent and flash. You saw, when you put someone with good hands like Matt Zuccarello with him, that pairing worked well. If you put a center into that mix as well, you've got something extra special. So yeah, I think if they go into next season with the same center plan that they had this past season, they deserve a lot of criticism because they need to figure that out. I know good centers don't just grow on trees, but whether it's internally, whether it's externally, that's a problem they need to solve, because I don't think you can go into next season with that same alignment, knowing what you know now after a full season of Kirill Kaprizov. Next question from Luke Hanlon, former student of mine, wants to know, what's your personal record for tacos ate / miles ran in the same day? And this goes back to, I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast before, but when I think Luke was part of either the first or the second class I taught. I've taught this sports journalism, sports media class at the University of Minnesota as an adjunct now for the past 5 years. It's weird, I've only, 5 years isn't forever, but now the years are starting to blend together, so I can't remember. I think Luke was part of that first year, though, and so what I was doing back then is, I think it was must have been the 2017, so like the winter, the winter semesters. I guess they call it spring semester, even though most of it's in the winter, and it's dark, and you're teaching, and you're getting up early. It's dark outside when you get to the 8 a.m. class, but I think that would probably been 2017. So I wasn't training for anything in particular, but I was still running a lot, which I still do now. But as part of an accountability play, I think the class was Tuesday, Thursday at that point. So Tuesday was my big Taco Tuesday day. Always, you got the $1 tacos at Taco John's that I like to partake in. And so as part of the accountability, I told myself I can have a certain amount of tacos, but I have to run that many miles that same day in order to offset, I guess, the damage done by the tacos, because they're not terrible for you, I don't think. Like, you can eat a lot of worse things, but it was more of an accountability thing. And it became a thing with the class where I was like, okay, guys, I'm doing it today. I'm going to get tacos, so keep me accountable. Next time you see me, ask me, how many miles did I run? Did I do the equivalent number? So that's the kind of backstory to that. Now, some of you might know I ate 15 tacos one day. I think that was that same year, 2017. I think maybe class was over by then, and that was kind of more of a dare, a whim. Would never do that again. Wouldn't recommend it. The first 10 of them went down fine, maybe even 12. Last 3 were kind of torture, but I did not run that day. Certainly didn't run that day. I think The most that I ever had in the same day that I ran, when I had the equivalent miles, was 6. And 5 was kind of the standard number, and 4 was kind of the, okay, I'm not, I'm not feeling it today, whether it's the running or the tacos. I'm going to kind of ease off a little bit. But I do like to keep the number the same just to kind of have that equivalency. But I think 6, Luke, was the most I ever did in the same day of miles and tacos. Just to keep myself, at an equilibrium and keep myself at a good place in both of those cases. Now, speaking of tacos, at Russ Nels wants to know, do I like beef tongue tacos? I haven't branched out that much lately. I believe I've had that, and I think it was pretty good. Sounds strange, but it's good. You got to try different things. That's not on the Taco John's menu, but of course I go a lot of different places, not just the chain restaurants for tacos. There's tons of great places to get, of the more authentic tacos here in the Twin Cities, and I've partaken on a lot of those. And I believe at one point I did have the beef tongue taco, but I'm more of like the spicy. I kind of like the barbacoa or the carne asada kind of style, if I'm going to be quite honest. But yeah, branch out, try all the different tacos in this world that this world has to offer, because tacos, let's face it, no matter what kind they are generally delicious. Last question, speaking of my passions, Nicholas wants to know, since you're a rollerblade enthusiast, have you ever considered interviewing Stephen Johns? Now, I got to admit, I had not heard the story of Stephen Johns, former NHL player who is rollerblading across the country as we speak. Nice story in ESPN.com. Recently, I think that was an Emily Kaplan story that I read the other day after I got this tweet from Nicholas, basically doing it to raise mental health awareness. He's had some concussion problems, has had some real mental health challenges as a result of that. Playing career is over, but to kind of bring himself into a certain amount of peace, he just kind of he decided one day, I'm going to rollerblade across the United States. And I think that's awesome. I've kind of daydreamed about doing something like that, not necessarily rollerblading, but whether it's walking or riding a bike, like just something big like that. Maybe not right now with 3 little kids in the house and the demands of job and whatnot. But in a retirement kind of setting, I can imagine myself doing something like that. Just doing something. I love big. I love big things. I love big unexpected things, and that to me is just just go do it. Why not? It's a great idea. It's a good cause, obviously, for himself to raise awareness. So I love that story. I'm glad Nicholas brought that to my attention. And maybe once I'm back into the mix here a little bit more, after next week, which is going to be kind of a series of special podcasts looking back at some great events 30 years ago. Maybe I'll try to get Stephen Johns on the show, because that would be a good follow up to that, and could talk to him about blading, which I'm not as much of a blade enthusiast. It's kind of become more of a bit, but I still do hop out there on the rollerblades every now and then, and I have done a rollerblade marathon before, in addition to the 5 running marathons that I have done. That is it for the all mailbag edition of this daily delivery. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll have Paul Clauda, Star Tribune high school sports editor. I had that job before he did. We're going to talk prep sports. We're going to talk about all Metro Sports Awards coming up. That'll be on Friday's show. And then, like I mentioned, next week, whole bunch of good stuff with looking back 30 years from now. I've got Brian Bellows talking about the 91 North Stars, Kent Herbeck talking about the 91 World Series. All sorts of fun episodes coming for you next week. Thanks for joining me here today on Daily Delivery, and we'll catch you again on Friday.